It's like the baptism scene in Godfather 2 when Michael Corleone decides to take out all of his enemies at once. In one weekend, Russell Brand, Lauren Boebert, and almost Robert F. Kennedy Jr. taken out of the game. And there's a coup in the Congo. You're getting used to this, aren't you? Not to be confused with Patrice Lumumba's Democratic Republic of the Congo, but the Republic of the Congo is now, right this minute, in the midst of a military takeover. The head of the Presidential Guard has seized power whilst his boss is in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. That's pretty familiar too. And we're remembering the original 9/11, when President Salvador Allende was murdered, by extension, by the United States of America. This is going to be a particularly bumpy, though careful, night here on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
Like the Vichy police captain in Casablanca, I was shocked to discover, thanks to the expenditure of millions of pounds by Rupert Murdoch's Sunday Times and the British state-owned Channel 4, and thousands of investigative journalistic hours, that Russell Brand was a rapacious, misogynistic sex addict. Not just a sex addict, but a heroin addict and an alcohol addict, and addicted also to himself. And his self-obsessive narcissism is a significant part of this story. But I was shocked, weren't you, that a man who told us many hundreds of times in public, on the stage, on television, and in books, had a shocking attitude to women and to sex. Mind you, it didn't stop a large number of women. He says more than 1,000 women. And who am I to doubt him? Going into his bedroom for what I assume was not a putative game of Scrabble or Tiddlywinks or, I don't know, gin rummy. Presumably people went to Russell Brand's bedroom knowing he was Russell Brand. Now, the much-hyped Channel 4 and Sunday Times exclusive, on which they expended more journalistic effort than, for example, the client list of Jeffrey Epstein and his paramour, Miss Maxwell. Not a bad British angle on a story, you might thought. Sunday Times, Channel 4 reveal the full list of those to which Ghislaine Maxwell were ferrying and carrying underage girls for illicit, illegal sex. Now that would be insight. That would be an effort worthy of the term journalistic practice. But we are asked to believe that all of these millions and all of these thousands of man-woman hours of British journalism's finest was honestly expended to bring down a comedian. Seriously? We'll come to what the other purposes might have been. But let's deal with some things right up front. I don't know Russell Brand. I've only met him once. He's never done any favour for me. In fact, quite the contrary. And I absolutely deplore, as does he, the misogynistic savagery of his attitude towards women in that period of his life in which he was, and told us so, rapaciously promiscuous, a predator of the worst kind, a predator you would not wish any woman, let alone your own daughters, to be involved with. He's 48 years old, This period lasted roughly half of his life. But it's 20 years gone, the heroin addiction. He still attends Narcotics Anonymous. Indeed, still works hard to help other people addicted to the evil of drugs. I don't know if he was still drinking at the time of the oldest of the allegations now leveled against him, which is 16 years, during which we never heard any whisper of these allegations, certainly not in the mainstream media, because they were actually employing Russell Brand at the time. At the time that these allegations are stated to have occurred, Russell Brand was a media darling on the BBC and on Channel 4. But I don't know when he stopped drinking. I only know that he stopped taking heroin in 2002, more than 20 years ago. The oldest of these allegations dates back to 2006, and the most recent of these allegations is 10 years ago. No report to the police about Russell Brand's conduct in these 4 cases showcased by the media this weekend has ever been made. In fact, so far as we know, even yet has not been made. The people making the allegations were, of course, represented by silhouettes or actors or both. And it looked and sounded that way, didn't it? No police report of any crime currently stands against Russell Brand, even though the Metropolitan Police today, in the wake of the story, have asked what they call victims to come forward. Victims that have not yet appeared. Now, if the allegations against Russell Brand of sexual assault and rape are well-founded, the place for them to be dealt with is in a court of law, where people will have to give evidence not for a check, but under oath, where people will have to tell their story in front of the person they are accusing and in front of their lawyers. Will have to be cross-examined. Forensic evidence will have to be adduced. Telephone evidence, text messages, and the like will have to be adduced. None of that has happened so far for Russell Brand. He has been subjected to the kind of trial by television, trial by accusation of the medieval kind. Now, I've been in this picture before. I could show you my scars incurred in defense of Julian Assange. Remember those? Remember those who were demanding that Julian Assange be deported to Sweden to face what turned out to be absolutely fake accusations of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and rape. I said they were fake at the time. I said they were a transparent attempt to get Assange out of Britain to a country more likely to extradite him to the United States of America to face his real charge, which was to embarrass and expose the crimes of the American empire and other empires in his role as WikiLeaks publisher-in-chief. I was right about Julian Assange and all those people who turned on him at the first whiff of these allegations turned out to be wrong, if not turned out to be hypocrites. In fact, some of my own comrades who shunned and blacklisted me because of my defense for Assange are now to be found on the front lines of demonstrations demanding the release of the very same Julian Assange they had implicitly denounced as a rapist back at the time. Less well known and definitely less eminent. Alex Salmond, the erstwhile First Minister of my country of Scotland, erstwhile leader of the Nationalist Separatist Party, the SNP, a man whose politics I abhorred, but whose character I knew well, having spent decades in the British Parliament with him. He was falsely accused of sexual crimes. Seems it's the go-to when someone inconvenient has to be gotten rid of. A majority women jury at the High Court in Edinburgh cleared Salmond of these charges, and he walked free but destroyed as a political figure of substance. These allegations against Brand should be investigated by the police. As far as I could see from my reading, it's the police in Los Angeles that would have to do the investigating, because the alleged crimes, as opposed to appalling behavior, are alleged to have happened in Los Angeles. Have they? Have they even yet received a report of a crime in Los Angeles? And if they have, will they wonder, as I do, why the people making these accusations have waited until now to make them? Russell Brand is apparently fond of saying, ask yourself, why am I being told this? And why am I being told it now? And that's what I want now to move on to. Half of his life, Russell Brand behaved like a beast in the jungle or an animal in the fields. But the second half of his life has not been like that. He's now married with 2 young daughters. He's a pillar of charity fundraising for women's charities, for mental health charities, for drug addicts, for alcohol addicts, and I don't know, perhaps for sex addicts too. He has left his life of addiction. What has he done instead? Well, I don't watch his program, although 26 million people do. That's rather more of a circulation than the Sunday Times in a year. That's rather more than the viewership of ailing, failing Channel 4 television, which requires subvention from the British taxpayer even to continue to exist, and depends upon the goodwill of the British state and the British government. In these television shows, on YouTube, on Rumble, elsewhere on social media, what does Russell Brand nowadays talk about? He talks against the war in Ukraine. He talks against lockdowns. He talks against compulsory vaccinations. He talks against Big Pharma. And I just wonder, as may you, if it is that has brought Russell Brand right over the target. I wonder if it was Russell Brand's interview with Tucker Carlson, another man who talks against the Ukraine war, another man who talks about and against Big Pharma, another man who talks against lockdowns and the vax industry. By the way, Tucker, I hope you've led a blameless life, because if I'm any judge, you'll be the next person in their firing line. Or maybe it was Russell Brand's interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that so attracted him to the fire, the flak, the millions of pounds worth of flak from these two pillars of British state orthodoxy, the Sunday Times and Channel 4. We already know that Mr. Kennedy has not led a blameless life, though not as shameful as the first half of Russell Brand's life, I hope. Maybe they have other plans for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Because this weekend, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was almost murdered in the state of California, where his father was murdered, in the United States of America, where his uncle, the President of the Republic, was murdered. Thanks to his private security firm, a man pretending to be a U.S. Marshal with 2 guns in holsters under each arm and extra ammunition packed in case, was thwarted in what may very well have been an attempt to bring RFK Jr.'s increasingly strident and successful campaign to a shuddering halt. Why was this left to a private security company? And I take my hat off to them. Because Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, who has a bust of RFK Jr.'s father behind him in the Oval Office in the White House in Washington, who claims to be a follower of the original RFK, refuses to provide Secret Service cover for his opponent in the Democratic primaries for the presidency in 2024. Just think about that. A man whose uncle, President Kennedy, and whose father, Senator Kennedy, were both murdered in public, on duty. RFK is being refused the Secret Service cover that is routinely every day being provided for Hunter Biden. How low can Joe Biden sink? How low can the Democratic Party, so-called, of the United States sink? We may not have seen the bottom yet, but this is pretty low, Joe. This is pretty low. And lastly, a more whimsical example. A woman that British viewers will never have heard of. A congresswoman, a Republican, a Trump-supporting Republican, Lauren Boebert, a single woman, a divorcee, is dating a single man. And they went to a theater together. And miraculously, high-definition video has emerged of Congresswoman Boebert's breasts being fondled entirely consensually by her beau, who happens to be a Democratic Party supporting bar owner, whom she has been dating since her divorce. Now, admittedly, she's well blessed in the décolletage department. But it is remarkable that the video of Lauren Boebert being fondled and apparently enjoying it is clearer and much, much faster than any of the video from January 6th, the laughably described insurrection in Washington, D.C. Brand, Boebert, Kennedy Who will rid the establishment of these turbulent priests? That's the question you need to be asking yourselves. I told you to fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
In the run-up to 9/11, 1973, I was already a hyper-political activist. I had been actually since the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War in 1968. But as the Vietnam War wound down to a victorious conclusion, much of my activity and much of my attention turned to the defense of the Chilean President Salvador Allende and his Popular Unity government, a democratically elected socialist government in a Latin America infested with generalissimos and fascist juntas and dictatorships of various kinds. Every day I would wake up expecting an American organized and inspired overthrow of the state, but I didn't expect Allende himself to be murdered. I did not expect to see one half of his spectacles smeared in blood on the floor of the palace in Santiago. I did not expect, with Western approval, 40,000 of his supporters to be tortured and murdered in stadia, including stadia in which languished some of the most accomplished, most gifted, most human of the Chilean people. People who had become a byword for Chile's resistance to fascism. I did not expect that the lousy dictator Augusto Pinochet would become so fated by Western allies that Mrs. Thatcher would count him as a friend and bosom buddy, that his drowning of millions of Chileans in the cold bath of the economic doctrines, shock doctrines of Milton Friedman and the neocon hordes so beloved by so many of Western politicians from the 1970s until now. I did not expect any of that. And every time I hear of 9/11, which is often, I think, of course, of the 4,000 people who perished in New York. But first and foremost, I will always think first of the 40,000 murdered in Chile by an American organized and inspired coup d'etat, and the millions of Chileans who spilled out as refugees around the world, including many to my own city and my own country. Professor Marcello Ferrada De Noli is a renowned authority on those days and what happened next. And I'm glad to say he joins us now on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Professor, welcome to the show. It is a melancholy fact, isn't it? It is a melancholy fact, isn't it, that nobody, except people your age and mine, very much remembers the bloodbath in Chile in 1973.
Indeed, the new generations are not so well informed. They are more and more disinformed about what's been happening in history and in referring episodes or in geopolitical episodes that actually have shaped the current situation that we have nowadays.
What was Allende's biggest crimes that earned him the enmity of the United States of America, the CIA, and the European satraps of the U.S. empire?
Well, that could we sum up in one and only event. He was the first democratically elected president with a socialist background and with a program which was clearly devised to construct a new socialist society in Chile in all kinds of spheres, economically and in health care and property of different means of production in agriculture, and fundamentally also the nationalization of the copper mining companies and other minings, which were at a time in control by the United States and other corporate interests. But in the main, it was not a economical threat. It was absolutely the political or geopolitical threat that the victory of Allende could signify for reshaping the panorama at that time. Kissinger said that himself in a meeting with President Nixon. It was even before the coup, when it was clear that Allende could be elected. And then he said the main threat is that the other countries in South America in the first place, and perhaps others in other latitude, would follow suit and elect democratically president with a similar socialist background that the one Allende had.
What role did Kissinger and Nixon play in the overthrow of President Allende?
Oh, well, it was a fundamental role. They took the initiative for this action, and long before the coup took place in September 11th, 1973. But already before, in a meeting that was held in the White House with the presence of Kissinger and the presence of Richard Helms, then director of the CIA, Nixon's orders were to create the conditions to overthrow Allende if he was going to assume the presidency, but preferably that organize a set of activities that would prevent that Allende could be elected. And his orders were, crystal clear. We know this because the National Archive have disclosed declassified documents in which are the notes of Richard Helms, handwritten notes of Richard Helms, in which he is reproducing the words said by Nixon, and he ordered the CIA, and I quote: "You have to dedicate full time and use the best men we have in this endeavor." So that meeting took place in September 15. There was September 15, 1970. That was 2 months before Allende could assume the presidency of the Republic of Chile.
Now, the methods that they used to create the conditions have become part of a playbook that we have become familiar with in many other so-called color revolutions. This was an early color revolution, wasn't it? You use your soft power, your economic power, your cultural power, and your secret state power to undermine the elected government of other countries as a precursor to overthrow them.
Exactly. Exactly. Kissinger's orders were to subvert the economic panorama as well as the political one, to prepare, the conditions, or to give the military the reasons to implement a plan for a coup d'etat. Actually was a CIA plan, and the same thing that in one way or the other, exactly as you are saying, has been happening in the so-called color revolutions. And the Ukrainian example is not at all outside that paradigm.
I don't know if these professors, Friedman and co., openly wished for tens of thousands of Chileans to be murdered and tortured in the wake of the coup. Maybe that was an embarrassment to them, maybe not. But they certainly moved in quickly to make Pinochet, the new tyrant, the poster boy for their kind of economic shock treatment, didn't they?
Yeah, but you see, the main purpose of the coup d'etat in Chile in the first period was not actually economic. Did not have an purely economic character. That came afterwards. As I said before, the main purpose was to stop the creation of one example that could be followed by other countries in the hemisphere, and etc. So, but as soon as Pinochet took over, then as a reaction to the socialist model of handling the economy, then they resorted to an extreme neoliberal, extreme economic liberal model represented by Friedman and their so-called Chicago boys, and even some economists from Chile went there to the United States and study closely those theories, which actually had a devastating effect in the economy of Chile. Well, excuse me, the economy of Chile was apparently very successful. Pinochet could eventually pay all the debt that Chile had in international agencies, etc. But the thing is that recovery, or that success that Chile could show economically really represented an enormous sacrifice from the poorer classes in Chile. I mean, still Chile is known as the country with the best economy in Latin America. Sometimes they use the Chilean model as an example to be implemented in other countries, but it is not so known that Chile still has one of the highest indexes when it comes to distribution of the income, or which is not favoring the poor classes. I mean, Chile is a country, is a rich country in the sense of what they produce, in the sense of their natural resources, etc. But the distribution of that output, it's going still to the elites, the ruling classes, etc. So that model started by the Friedman boys in Chile. The main feature is not the the success of the Chilean economy, apparently in how it was viewed internationally, but it was the devastating effect that occasioned among the masses in Chile.
I spent time with Chileans in Paris this weekend. It is evident that the scars, the deep physical and psychological scars suffered by Chilean society as a result of the coup have not at all entirely healed. Although a socialist, self-styled socialist president now rules again in Santiago, and indeed, I think Allende's grandson is prominent in politics in the country. The slogan, no pardon and no forgetting, is very much still on the minds. It's unfinished business, isn't it?
Yes, of course it is, because the wounds are not being healed. We have families that still have members of their family not being accounted. There is the phenomena of called the desaparecidos, the missing ones, the disappeared people, and of course, when you don't know the fate that actually the fate of actually, I believe that it's nearly 2,000 people that just disappeared. And there is no explanation for that, and no further investigations. Of course, there are investigations, and some military have been judged, and sometimes they have been condemned to terms in prison. But that is not representative of what has been happening in Chile during the 50 years. So wounds, as I said, are not healed, and the wounds are not only those referred personally to the mind, to the memories of those people who were fighting at that time, but the worst memory is that because we are reminding of that in Chile, of the economic catastrophe that signified for the masses the implementing of the neoliberal model by Pinochet. And let me add just one thing. But also, the political organizations, like, for instance, the movement of the revolutionary left, MIR, in which I participated in Concepcion in the resistance activities of this moment. We have lost vast number of our members, not much in the actually resistance, because it was very short-lived and we were defeated. But the repression that Allende initiated from the 11th of September onwards was devastating for our organization, who was the leading organization in terms of armed resistance, but also against other organizations like the Democratic Socialist Party, the Communist Party, of course, and etc. There are also open hills, not yet. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Open wounds. No. Yeah. Professor Marcello, thank you very much for joining us to remember the original 9/11. What did more damage to Libya, Storm Daniel or Obama Hillary Clinton? 19,402 people have voted, and it's pretty bad news for Obama and Clinton. Let me take a quick break, and I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
Now, War of the Worlds was, of course, a fictional invasion of Earth by extraterrestrials who were not very peaceful. Mind you, they were coming to a very hostile planet, weren't they? As indeed they still might be, because the pace is quickening on UFOs. Sometimes it looks like the state is seeking a look over there moment when things get tough here on the planet Earth. Look up there. There must be life outside of our orbit. But other times, it looks fairly intriguing. In Mexico, in the Mexican Congress, over the last week or so, the remains, the skeletal remains of what it was claimed to be extraterrestrial, non-human beings was unmasked. Some of them looked remarkably like current serving members of the US Senate. Dianne Feinstein and Mitch McConnell. And even in the White House, Joe Biden sprang to mind. And they did look rather uncannily like Steven Spielberg's E.T., still one of the greatest movies ever made. But that could be because Spielberg was onto something. Let's see what lies beneath. Philip Mantle is a UFO researcher and author and the publisher of Flying Disc Press. What a wonderful name for a publishing house. Philip, thanks very much for joining us. As I look out at the universe, as I do every evening, I find it literally absurd to imagine that there's no life anywhere in the multiple universes of billions of planets that have existed for billions of years. Is that how you feel about it?
Absolutely, George, and most scientists as well. I mean, our knowledge of the universe has expanded over this last 20 years or so, and it's now estimated that in the visible universe, we have 2 trillion galaxies. And within those 2 trillion galaxies, of course, there are countless stars and planets. I don't know what the next one up is from a trillion, George, to be honest, but it's an awful lot. So there's, the universe is much larger than we ever imagined, and much older as well. That's also been recently revised. We're talking, billions of years, and here we are in amongst it all.
Yes, hallelujah, I say. It doesn't weaken my religious belief, far from it. The idea that all of these trillions of planets and galaxies came into being entirely as a chance, by chance and from nothing is certainly far more far-fetched than having a belief in God. But I'll not tempt you down that road, unless you want to go down it, of course. But the idea that on only one tiny planet, in only one galaxy, life would develop is inherently ridiculous, no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether you believe in creation or evolution, it really doesn't make any difference. If you believe in creation, then why would a supreme being create such a large universe and have us as the only, intelligent species in it? Same with, evolution. We know that the chemical compounds that make up you and I, George, are in abundance everywhere. They're not specific just to our small part of the universe. They are everywhere. And we know through study on this planet where you find water, H2O, there is life. And of course, hydrogen and oxygen is in abundance everywhere in the universe. So the probability of life existing elsewhere is pretty good. Whether it looks anything like you or me, though, George, that's a different matter altogether.
Yes, let's come to that. Were you impressed by the display in the Mexican Congress last week?
Not at all. The things put on display in the Mexican Congress are a hoax. They are fake. They were presented by a gentleman called Jaime Maussan, who's a well-known hoaxer and has been at it for years and years and years, and yet they're falling for it again. Why is another question. And, I honestly don't know. But these are fake, George, so take no notice of them whatsoever.
What should we be looking out for then? What, if any? Because by the same token, if there are trillions of galaxies, and whatever, as you say, the number after trillion is, I don't know myself, gazillion, maybe, Brazilian, I have no idea. But if there are all these places to choose, it might well be that nobody ever visited us, this tiny little planet. But is there any evidence or reason to believe or suspect, in your view, any extraterrestrial intelligence ever came here?
That's a good question. I mean, our own Ministry of Defence will tell you that they have had sightings reported to them that they cannot identify. They're not going to say they're extraterrestrial, they just remain unidentified. Same just this week, NASA has set up their own, investigation. And again, their head said, there are sightings that we don't know what they are. They remain unidentified. And also the American government set up their own UFO study separate from NASA, although they will coordinate with each other. And again, they have released a number of things statistically saying, there's a number of the things that's been reported to us, primarily by military people, usually pilots, that we can't figure out at the moment. They leave us scratching our head. But you don't have to just rely on military personnel, George. There are people from all walks of life who just about their own daily business encounter something that, again, after careful investigation, leaves civilian researchers like myself scratching my head. And I'm fairly skeptical, George. I'm not a believer in that respect. But there are certain things that you really do puzzle you. Whether they're extraterrestrial or not remains to be seen, but certainly puzzling. So the U in UFO still stands for unidentified.
What would be some of the most interesting things that have puzzled you?
Well, you mentioned Steven Spielberg, in the introduction. Steven Spielberg's favorite case, because he made the movie Close Encounters. The phrase Close Encounters came from a UFO researcher, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He worked on the United States Air Force Project Blue Book, and he investigated a case in a place called Pascagoula, Mississippi, in 1973, where two local fishermen had a close encounter, which we know today as an alien abduction. And they were interrogated in the sheriff's office the following day at Keesler Air Force Base. And since then, a number of other witnesses in and around the area at the same time, George, have now stepped forward and come out of the woodwork. Where this location was, where these two gentlemen were fishing that night, is not an out-of-the-way place. It's right by Highway 90. There's a huge motorway bridge, goes over the river. There's boats coming and going. And people have said, well, I saw that thing that night as well. So, it is one of the standout cases. And it was Dr. Allen Hynek's favorite case. And he investigated, hundreds and hundreds of them for the Air Force and then as a civilian researcher.
Sometimes you read that ancient phenomena, the wonders of the world, the pyramids, for example, the Inca and Mayan civilizations, display precision of geometry and astronomy that seem, on the face of it, to have been beyond what the levels of education and scientific knowledge and indeed tools and including tools of measurement, would have allowed it. Some believe that these are phenomena which seem to reflect a fleeting visit, perhaps, of people from other worlds. What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's known as the ancient astronaut theory, and it started with a chap by the name of Eric von Daniken in his book Chariots of the Gods. The subtitle was, is God an astronaut? In other words, it's not some superior being in heaven. It's actually a spacefaring, alien from elsewhere. But, there is no positive proof to support that. We do realize that, our ancient ancestors were just as clever as you or I, George. Our brain didn't work any differently, but they worked within the environment they had at that time. And yes, there are puzzles, but we must go back, for example, look at the ancient Greeks. All our mathematics is based on the Greeks. They even measured the circumference of the Earth without sophisticated tools. They knew it was round. And yet you still have strange people today who'll argue that the Earth is flat, which is beyond me. It really is. But, the ancient astronaut theory is a nice one. And it would be nice if it was true. But again, it lacks that smoking gun, George, that one piece of evidence that would prove it. But, it's nice. And it will continue. Of that, I've no doubt.
Of course, it's possible, Philip, that aliens took a look at the mess we are making of this little world of ours and decided that we're not the kind of neighbours they want to get friendly with. That's possible, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it yourself, George, you're a passing tourist alien, and then look at the feuds and the wars and the starvation and natural catastrophes and one thing and another. And you think, well, perhaps we'll go somewhere else for a vacation. I'm not coming here. So maybe a quick look and say, see you later, fellas. You wouldn't blame them, would you?
Philip, I love your no-nonsense way of talking, and I'm officially appointing you right here and now. I hope you'll accept as the mother of all talk shows, UFO expert and spokesman. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
And a laugh.
My pleasure,
talking
George.
to you.
Yeah, my pleasure, and nice to talk to you.
All the best. And you, thank you very much, Philip Mantle. There's a legend on the line. It's Simon in Florida with what is a looked forward to weekly update. Go ahead, Simon.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. 3 very quick but significant stories and an extremely profoundly sincere note of thanks to you. First off, you'll recall we talked about Secretary of State Blinken's now infamous speech regarding America's claim to leadership of the upcoming New World Order. Well, the same day, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a 5,400-word treatise on their view of the future of global governance. So the superpowers are well and truly taking up the challenge from Mr. Blinken and the Biden administration. And then just 2 days after that, Nikolai Patrushev, who's been thought of as a possible replacement for Vladimir Putin, should one of Mr. Putin's numerous ailments that you have so concisely regaled us with, one of his utmost forms of cancer and so forth, finally take its deadly toll. He put out a long article exactly in line with the comment that you just made about the last old empire, and the article was called The Collapse of the Parasite Empire. So obviously the Russian administration has fully taken up the Blinken challenge as well, as indeed it would seem have the G77 group of now 134 nations who were meeting this week in, of all places, and how ironic, Havana, Cuba. They've put out a 46-point declaration that, whilst it doesn't name the United States, one could clearly make some clear inferences. And obviously, China has had their wise hand in that declaration. It definitely refers to the shared future of humanity. So then we come upon the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where in completely unverified rumors, it's been said that the Crown Prince has been listening to the back catalogue of the Pet Shop Boys. And when coming across It's a Sin, he realized that SIN referred to the Saudi-Israeli normalization, and has indeed, in real life, pulled out at the last minute as an enormous blow to both the Biden administration and the administration of Mr. Cohen and Mr. Netanyahu, whereas the Biden administration had hoped that this would be the crown jewel, so to speak, the crowning glory of his entire 4-year term in terms of American foreign policy. And one might take the view, much like the lyrics, that he decided that he didn't want to live a life full of shame, and decided to take the heed of the Shia Grand Ayatollah of Bahrain, who this week said that such a deal, or indeed opening an Israeli embassy, much as the Bahraini government did this week, would indeed have one declared as Muharib, which would mean an enemy of God, destined indeed to live a life full of shame. But on a personal note, Mr. Galloway, you made the joke about Biden and Blinken being regarded by the world as the Laurel and Hardy of diplomats. And that caused me to think that actually, rather than being a dynamic duo, perhaps for my own personal development and putting my views out in addition to your show, that if I were to find a co-partner and make an odd couple, much like Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, that I needed somebody to clean up my language, keep my hands off the ladies, and tidy up my news desk. So I'll be launching a show on Facebook daily called Weaponized News, starting on Tuesday. And my very sincere thanks to you for giving me that idea.
Well, I'll be in your audience. Hang on every word that you afford us, and I hope you'll continue to do so. And all I can say is, well done, the Pet Shop Boys. And I never thought I'd say that. Ronan is a new caller, and he's in Belfast, but wants to talk about Russia. Ronan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, George. It's a pleasure to speak to you, sir. I've been an admirer for quite a long time.
Thank you.
The point that I want to make was a conversation that I had quite recently with a friend of mine, and I was sort of drawing various parallels with the Russia-Ukraine and, you know, how that situation all started with the coup and all of that kind of thing. We know about Victoria Nuland. We know about the conversation she had with Jeffrey Pyatt, and people still willfully ignore it. And people still to this day willfully ignore, you know, the 17,000 plus people that were killed in that 8-year period before, you know, 22nd of February 2022. You know, the 17,000 people. And the point that I was making to this friend of mine, he is a friend of mine, but, you know, these issues are divisive, and as you rightly know, you can be speaking to very intelligent people, but if they are blind to various facts, you know, they're as dumb as a post. It's as simple as that. And I was trying to explain to him, look, we can agree. I live in Belfast. I grew up during the Troubles. So I'm familiar with it in an awful lot of ways. I'm by no means an expert, but I'm familiar enough with everything that happened over here. And I was making the point to him that, look, you know, you can agree that the Troubles was a bad time. I think we can all agree that it wasn't good. There was nothing particularly great about the idea of people dying because, well, it ended up, you know, it became a bit of a religious thing, but you and I both know it was about civil rights at the start. And it was always about civil rights. And my point to this gentleman was, listen, whenever Svoboda and Yancek and all these other people basically got in, whenever they were handpicked, the first edict that they put down was, if you speak Russian as your primary language, you're now a second-class citizen. And that was their only crime. That was literally their only crime. That was why they started being beaten in the streets, having their businesses attacked, their houses attacked, which eventually escalated to the full-scale assault on the Donbass region that we have seen over the last, well, I mean, it seems like only yesterday, but we're 9 years into this at this point.
9 years,
and my whole
almost
point,
a decade.
Yeah, exactly. And my whole point to him was, listen, 17,000 people killed in 8 years, and people didn't bat an eyelid because they're Russians. And I get it. There's a degree of Cold War hangover with an awful lot of this stuff, and we've been bombarded for years and years and years and years about Putin's this, Putin's that, Putin's a bad man. Listen, I'm sure he's done plenty of bad things, but I don't think he holds a candle to Tony Blair, personally. I don't think he holds a candle even to guys like Cameron, in all truth. Because whatever you want to think about Vladimir Putin, he has done good things for the Russian people, and that has always been his primary concern. Now, in relation to this escalation that we are watching, and we are watching it, and there is a very, very real threat of, full-blown Armageddon, and it's foolish to pretend that there isn't. It really is. My whole point is that people, and it goes to the point that you were making to your previous caller, people need to go back and they need to read the history of these events. They need to read about the OUNM and the OUNB. The OUNB was Stefan Bandera. This is the guy that the Kyiv government has, for the last number of years, has been renaming streets after these people. They've been, erecting statues and proclaiming all of this, this wonderful, this great paragon of Ukrainian virtue. The man was a murderer. It was something, what was it, 1.25 to 1.5 million?
A mass murderer, a genocider of millions of people, a Hitler auxiliary in the mass murder of Jews, of Polish people, of Ukrainian people, of Russian people. A mass murderer is a national hero of the regime in Kiev. I'm cutting you short, Ronan, only for this reason, and that is the hour and the presence of a legend on the line after you. But that was your first call, but it was the best call of what has been an evening of many great calls. So don't be a stranger. Come back soon. Norma in Bristol, the legend, is the last caller on the line now. Norma, what would you like to say?
Well, George, I've got a lot of stress at the moment because my husband is very seriously ill, but my family and neighbours are rallying around. So I thought I'd tell you this little story. It's true. A long time ago, when I was participating in Big Brother's Little Brother show, and the presenter was Russell Brand, and at the close of the show, he came up to me and he kissed me on the cheek and he said that I was a star. And I've always remembered that.
How prescient, how far-sighted was he when he spotted you all those years ago, decades ago, as a future star of the mother of all talk shows? I'm terribly sorry about your stress, Norma. You're in my prayers, and I know for a fact are in the thoughts of everybody who watches regularly the mother of all talk shows. I've run out of time.
I'm
very happy that we got that little vignette from Norma in about the day that she kissed Russell Brand. I've run out of time, but not run out of things to say. The show will be back, God willing, on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. Who knows, we may well have seen developments in the issues that we've talked about on the show here tonight, particularly that Crimean story that broke on Sky News just before the end. But I want you, in conclusion, not to miss the significance of the fact that out of almost 21,000 people, a tiny handful blame the incredible incredible misery in Libya on a storm rather than on those who stormed it, on a pack of lies. David Cameron, Sarkozy, Obama, Biden, Clinton, they destroyed Libya on a pack of lies. And now the results are washing up. Dead on the beach of the Mediterranean country of Libya. May God damn them, these criminals in Washington, in Whitehall, and in the Elysee. So much I'd like to say, some of which I cannot, but maybe I'll be able to say more on Wednesday. Do join me then, please, for the midweek mother of all talk shows at 9 p.m. UK time. And don't forget my message. If you were to bring just one other person, a family member, a workmate, a co-parishioner, an acquaintance, bring them on Wednesday to Moats. See you then.